Hi guys, and welcome back to part 8 in the Warbirds Replicas Mosquito build series of videos. Notice I'm still sporting my latest headgear. Hopefully in the course of the next 2 days I'll have a new one to rock. Anyway, this video is all about finishing off the fuselage, the formers, the top of the fuselage on top of the wing, and putting in the fuselage joining former together with the foam deck that goes in place on the top of the wing. I'm also going to be able to, whilst that is glued and drying, I'm going to be able to go back to the rear fuselage and stick the pushrods, the carbon pushrods in place, or the outers I should say, in place. And I may even get to a situation where I can stick the tail unit in place and the foam covering for the fuselage at the back, which will more or less complete the build of the rear end of the Mosquito. So without further ado, let's nip over to the build bench and see the parts that I'm going to be working with. With the formers now stuck in and the rear former glued on, it's time to cut the hole through for the joining pin. Now the joining pin comprises an outer and an inner, and the outer is glued in place, and to remove the rear fuselage you pull the pin out from the top and hey presto, it pulls apart. Now you really need to cut the hole before you put the top tongue box in place, because otherwise it's going to be difficult to get a drill bit through of sufficient size. But you can use the top tongue plate to mark the position of where that hole is going to be there, and take that out, drill it through. That's a 10mm hole in there. I wouldn't worry too much about the size of it, because this is going to be glued in place, and if you use an expanding glue then obviously that's going to fill up any gaps. Obviously the rear tongue box is in place there, so you've got limited access to drill down through there. What I've also done on mine, I've actually recessed the underside of the tongue box, the underside tongue plate we'll call it, so that the 10mm tube will sit recessed in there, which makes it easier to locate. To measure the length of the tube required, use the former, and it's going to go from there, or in my case just above there because it recessed into the tongue box, down to the top of the tongue box there. So you can cut that outer tubing to length there to match those dimensions, and then offer it all up. That's bottoming out. You see there's a bit of wiggle room there for me, and then the top tongue box fits in and locates on the top of the tube goes into the inside, and then just to make sure that my pin goes through, and there it goes. Let's just move the fuselage wing around. You can see there top and bottom going through. Now when you glue that guide tube in place, the outer tube in place here, I would recommend using the inner tube to hold them in the correct location. You shouldn't have any fear of getting any glue on this, but if you were afraid of that, a light coating of Vaseline maybe on this would prevent any glue sticking to this tube and preventing it going in, or preventing it coming out, I should say. Right, so that's the next job for me, is to glue this in place and glue the upper tongue box in place. Don't forget to abrade the tube where the glue is going to go to give it a good key. And I suggest using expanding glue for where this goes through the wing core. So I'm going to apply a thin smear to the tube, starting right at the bottom, so that when I work it in, yes, I know it's going to push it up, but I'll just maneuver that up and down so I've got a good layer of glue in the hole. Looking at the rear fuselage, as I said in the previous video, I've mounted my servos that way round. Now arguably, as Eric pointed out to me, what I could have done was mount those the other way round so the arms are underneath. That way would mean that my outers, my pushrod outers, could stay underneath the crutch and maybe produce a smoother run through. Having said that, when I put my pushrod through, and by the way, I've epoxied these solder extensions on there so that I can then put my clevis on to the end. Anyway, this is the one for the tail wheel and rudder, but that is very free. There is no binding there at all. And likewise, when I put the elevator one in, you can see there that literally, well, you can't see it there, but there, it's dead easy to push in and out. So there's no binding on those for the servos to have to fight against. Now I've cut those to length, and in order to cut them to length, I had to do some more work to the tail assembly, which is this. And there is the steerable tail wheel which operates the rudder, and there's the control arm I need to connect to, and obviously the opposite side will be my elevator horn here. I'll come back to the plastic bit in a moment. So the idea is this slots in to the crutch like so. You may need to trim it slightly so that the leading edge meets the crutch. I know that both Eric and my kits have got foam decking which falls a bit short of where it should be, and we're going to pack that out with balsa. Eric's already done it, but I'm going to pack that out with balsa or foam or whatever. The production ones will be longer. Anyway, turning the attention now to look at the push rods. Let's get them the right way round. So that's in place. So here, the problem I foresaw was that there's not a lot of room for the push rod to operate, because the outer is there and I've only got a small amount of room to operate the rudder and steering tail wheel. So what I did was I found the smallest clevis that I could get. So if you look at a normal metal clevis there, and side by side, you can see that this clevis is about 8mm shorter than the metal clevis, and that makes a lot of difference, because with that on there, to give me full movement, just push that out of the way, to give me full movement that I will need, I'm guessing at approximately this sort of angle here, that push rod is hard in and the clevis will be screwed right to the end. It's difficult for you to see, but that will give me enough movement there on that. What I'm going to have to do is, when I infill this gap here with my balsa or foam, I'm going to obviously have to cut a channel out for the push rod to come out, and I may even have to, yeah, by the looks of it, I may have to just cut out of the plastic just that bit there as well. So you can see a bit of balsa will go in there, or foam, with a slot in it for the push rod to come out. It's not too bad. And the other side isn't an issue, because obviously the control horn for the elevator is here somewhere, there, and I've got all of this push rod exposed anyway. Once again, looking at it, I'll have to cut a bit of a relief out of the plastic there and there, but that's not a major issue. Now, I had to get that done because the way that I'm using push rods with glued on solder extensions means that they're in effect going to be in there permanently. That's glued on, so the next job for this one is to glue the servo end, which will be like that. I can't get at it once it's in place, because obviously the top deck will go over it like that. Yes, I'll be able to maybe take it off the servo arm, but that's as good as it gets really. So I need to get that in place and glued in place and dry before I can put the top deck on. And the top deck has to go on before the rear tail feather assembly goes in, because that all slots together quite nicely. So if I just pull my cables back through there, he says, there we go, pull them out. So this gets glued in place first of all, and then this rear assembly slots in. So you can see all these need to be in place before that happens. Something else that needs to be done as well before that happens is, you can see what I've done on the front here with the bottom tongue. I've actually glued this in place, and I'll show you how I've done that in a moment. I'm just going to glue these clevises on to the push rods so I can let that dry. I'll be putting epoxy on those, so I can let that dry and get on with other work. Actually, whilst those push rods are drying, I'll talk about the plastic tail cone. So it's in two halves as with all the other mouldings. It's a bit of a tricky job to cut it and to get it to line up. At the end of the day, when you're cutting it down, this is a good reference point, the width of this, because the width of that finished joint, two pieces together, should be roughly the same thickness as the fin. You've got to make a cut out the bottom. I cut mine out right the way back here to allow it to slide over the tail wheel assembly. You don't need, you could just cut a smaller slot in there, but as I'm putting balsa in here, I'm going to probably have to cover that with a bit of balsa here or whatever. Anyway, the glue that I used to stick it to the tailplane, I used the 5-minute lumberjack wood adhesive, the expanding one. What you could do is you could draw where it's going to go, and then on the inside put some little balsa support strip, something to press that against, because it's quite awkward getting that lined up. And I can see already that I've actually made a bit of a mistake there. That's belled out there. I may cut that back off and push that in a bit. I don't know, I'll see how the whole thing joins up. But so yeah, if you put little thin strips of balsa down, then you've got something, glue those into the tailplane first, then you've got something to glue these onto. The same with the top here and here. So it took quite a while, quite a long time to actually get that all sorted. The joins, I just used some thin plastic card on the joins and glued them on one side, then held them with clamps and taped all around it. Used a bit of the expanding 5-minute lumberjack glue to help out as well. Anyway, I got there in the end. My least favourite job of any kit is the plastic work. It is difficult because it's difficult to find the reference lines that you're cutting to. It's difficult to join the blessed things together, but hey, it's done. Or that bit is. I've got the nacelles to think about later, but there we go. So going back to the tongue. Now, as you can see, I've already glued this one in place, and the way I did that was I got the wing and fuselage front section. You can see get this in place so I don't knock everything off the table. You can see here I've got the tongue in place, held in by the pin, so the tongue just slides in there. Put the pin down, and obviously that goes through the bottom tongue. And the idea is these bits of the tongue, the blade end of them, they get stuck into the foam top and bottom deck of the rear fuselage section, so that when you want to dismantle, you pull the pin out and obviously those tongues come out. Now, the idea Richard had originally was, yeah, you assemble, make all your rear fuselage, put these tongues in place, put some glue on them, put some cling film or whatever on the mating surfaces of the former, because we don't want those to stick together, and then literally force the two halves together and they will bite into the foam and force their way in. I decided to do it slightly differently, to do the bottom tongue, because I can get at it. I can get to where it's going on the foam of the lower deck. So I can help it, I can glue it, I can clamp it to make sure it's in there firmly. So that's exactly what I did. Just moving the wing back out of the way. So that's what I did, with it attached and clamped to the fuselage joining former. the tongue obviously held in place because of the tongue box and the pin through, and I just pushed it backwards and forwards so it formed a little channel or a trough in the foam. I then pulled it away and I put some expanding glue in, again the lumberjack wood adhesive glue. I put that in the trough that had formed, then pushed it back, clamped them together and let it dry. Once it was dry, I then, you can just about see it there, I then used an offcut of foam, in fact the inner cut of the foam deck, I cut that to suit and I glued that on top of the tongue inside. So it's now going to be quite difficult to see. You can see it in there. That tongue is now stuck to the bottom of the foam, but with a foam block on top of it. Talking to Eric about this, he doesn't think the same will apply with the top deck because that possibly sits a bit too high. So to get over that problem, what I'm going to do is, if I can get it, take the foam block that it was cut from, which is that. I'm going to cut a piece of that foam. Doesn't need to go full depth, just needs to go across there. I'm going to glue it in place, but what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to glue that bit there because that's where the tongue is going to sit in there somewhere. So I'll just glue my piece of foam in place, and it'll be, I would guess, something like that. Let's draw it on a pen, with a pen that you can see what I'm doing. I'll probably cut a wedge out like that, glue that in the bottom, keeping it, if you remember the previous video I said you've got to make pockets for the triangular brackets to sit in the foam deck. So I will cut this foam and stick that in so it actually sits inside, so it will come up to here, so I can mark it. So my bit of foam will be that bit there. That's what I'm going to use. Going back maybe to about something like that. So I'll cut that out now and glue that in place. I've glued and clamped that block in place, so I've just got to wait for that to go off. Then I'll stick the deck on top of the rear fuselage, and I will then offer that up to the front fuselage to dig the trough out for the tongue and glue that in place. And once that's done, then I can slide this back on the tail feathers assembly, and that will, apart from fine tuning, filling out the gaps, that will finish the main construction of the rear of the fuselage. And I can then turn my attention to finishing off the front fuselage. We are getting there, very, very close, which is good news. Well guys, that completes the next video and the build. Got on quite well. Again, some good progress with the controls for the tail feathers, getting the tail feather assembly piece sorted, especially the plastic tail cone. And yeah, so good progress. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Put likes down below, thumbs up, put comments in the comments box and I'll get back to you when I can. And look forward to seeing you in the next one, guys. Thanks for watching. Cheers.